If you're in the mood for a heartwarming, tear-jerking, and occasionally hilarious film, then you gotta check out The Sky is Pink. This movie is based on the real-life story of Aisha Shohari, a spunky and spirited young girl who refuses to let a rare genetic disorder hold her back. This is a story about love, perseverance, and the true meaning of family. But be warned, you may need to bring a box of tissues to this one because it's a real emotional roller coaster. Get ready to laugh, cry, and maybe even be inspired by this incredible story. The story opens with a young couple, Aditi and Nuran, who've just discovered that they're expecting. And while this might be good news for some, Aditi and Nuran are not that delighted because, for one, they already have their son, who keeps them busy enough, and secondly, they didn't plan a baby. More importantly, though, the two of them are not ready to have another baby after losing their daughter Tania to a rare genetic disease. The story is narrated by Aisha herself as she explains her struggles and how they both brought her family together and tore them apart at the same time. She admits that she feels that she was the reason her parents argued most of their lives because, of course, 2 kids meant too many responsibilities. And so, these 2 lovebirds had more than just their hands full. Aisha has even given her family nicknames like Panda for Nuran, Moose for Aditi, and Giraffe for Ishan. But coming back to Aditi and Nuran, they had been in love for the longest time. However, 2 years into their marriage, Moose converted to Christianity, but Panda did not object. In fact, he fully supported her decision until this moment when he realized that abortion was a sin in the Bible. So, he insists that they should get an abortion because it's the only option. The baby could turn out just like Tanya, and they couldn't bear that loss a second time. Plus, they were already lucky enough to have Ishan. He was all they needed to be happy. Still, Aditi is adamant that the baby was coming for a special reason and the devout Christian within her could never her child. And as Aisha explains, Moose always gets her way. So, fast forward to the birth of their baby, Aisha Shohari, a true beauty named Life. The celebration is immense, as it should be. And the entire family reassures Nuran and Aditi that this time will be different because God will not make them suffer again. And at this moment, everything is genuinely perfect. But alas, all good things must come to an end. Sure, Panda and Moose were happy, but that didn't mean they were rich. They didn't even have enough for their honeymoon in Nepal, let alone London. And though it wasn't in the best circumstances, they also got to see London. Something was not right with Aisha, and they had to fly all the way to London to get a second opinion. But it turns out that their troubles were far from over. It seemed that Aisha suffered the same fate as Tanya, but they were prepared this time, and they would risk it all to save their daughter. The procedure was risky, but their only hope was a sibling donor. As for the price of the procedure, well, that was something they couldn't really cover with sheer hope and determination. Paying for the flight to London had been hard as it was, and now they had to fund almost enough to land on the moon. £120,000, to be exact. You could say that Panda and Moose were more resilient than most parents because they were so ready to fight, even if it seemed like a lost battle, to begin with. So much so Panda vowed that he would save Aisha even if it meant that he had to beg for the money. He would do it. He would do it for her. Because he really couldn't lose another daughter. And beg he did, by distributing posters in almost every nook and cranny of London. He even went on a radio program called Sunrise Radio to appeal for donations. The host, Arjun Gill, told him not to get his hopes up because he probably wouldn't be able to get more than £20,000 at most. So, he shared his story about how his daughter was born with severe combined immune deficiency, which makes it close to impossible for her body to fight infections. Such babies usually don't survive more than a year unless they get the treatment they need. He then goes on to explain how their firstborn daughter succumbed to the same condition. He elaborates that only 1 in 1 million couples have a baby with SCID, but they somehow ended up with 2. With their family's help, they've managed to collect around £60,000, but they still need another £60,000 to fund the operation. And that's really all Panda could manage before his voice breaks and Arjun takes over. Even Moose leaves a note at her church, reminding God that Aisha meant the one who stays alive. Panda and Moose are desperate at this point, so they're thinking of the worst-case scenarios. They both suggest that the other should marry rich to get the money. And Moose even suggests that she'll move to her parents' house with Aisha so Panda and Ishan won't get too attached to her. Not to mention, they also need to explain the situation to Ishan. But they somehow manage to calm themselves and decide to just tackle one thing at a time. And sure enough, life throws yet another problem to occupy their minds. Apparently, Nuran is not Ishan's father, or at least that's what the doctor believes after analyzing the test results. However, he also informs them that it's probably just a mistake and that they'll repeat the tests before making any decisive conclusions. Still, the cat is out of the bag, and Nuran is not ready to let it go so easily. Nuran accuses Aditi of cheating on him, claiming that it's the only explanation for why Ishan is normal. He thinks that Tanya and Aisha got the SCID gene from him, and Ishan didn't because he's not his son. And this seriously riles up Aditi, who tells him to take his suspicions and narrow-mindedness back to North Delhi. A few harsh words are exchanged between the two as both consider the other's claims downright ridiculous. They needed money for one kid and proof for the other, and the only person smiling through this crisis was Ishan. That too only because he didn't know what was up. In fact, the only reason the two of them were still together was because of Aisha. Fortunately, the retest results came out pretty soon, revealing that Ishan is their child after all. At this, Nurin remarks that he never had a doubt but was only acting stupidly because of the tense situation, and even surprises Aditi with Indian sweets, and they make amends. With one problem out of the way, the two of them can finally take a moment to just breathe, and it's time to start worrying about funding Aisha's operation again. Before the anxiety can fully grip them, though, Nurin receives a call from Arjun at Sunrise Radio, who announces that they've managed to collect almost £250,000 for baby Aisha through their national and international listeners. Nurin is obviously over the moon and has no words to express his gratitude, so he says that he's thankful to everyone for treating their daughter as his own. And with that, it was on to the next problem for the Shohris. The bone marrow test results revealed that Ishan was not a suitable match for Aisha, so this was also a task for Panda. He had to make yet another sacrifice, though this was nowhere near the last one. And Panda did not think twice before making his choice, so Aisha became the first SCID patient to receive both a bone marrow and stem cell transplant. But Aisha's new cells would take time to develop into fully functional immune cells, years even, which meant the Shohris still had many things to worry about. Moose would stay with Aisha in London while Panda would take Ishan back to India, until they could all safely relocate to India. And though this might seem like a fairly simple arrangement, Panda and Moose have never been apart for so long since their 8-year marriage. Thus, this was the start of one of the hardest parts of their struggle yet. Not only would they miss each other, but they'd both have to stay apart from one of their kids for as long as it took Aisha to develop stable immunity, and nobody really knew for sure how long that would be and if it even happened eventually. Now that Ishan wasn't around his mother anymore, things were also starting to take a toll on him. In fact, he can't help but cry on the phone to his mother, explaining how his teacher scolded him for coloring the sky pink. So much so, he innocently seeks reassurance from Aditi over the sky being pink. And, of course, Aditi reaffirms that Ishan can paint the sky whatever color he feels like. And if he thinks the sky is pink, then it most certainly is. In her emotional rant, she tells him to never give up on his dreams and to follow his heart no matter what anyone else says. And finally, she soothes him by telling him about the toy train that she sent for him as a gift. But things aren't easy for Moose because while the rest of the family is in India, she's alone with baby Aisha in London. And to top it off, the doctors have recommended keeping Aisha isolated to avoid her catching some kind of infection. So, for her own sanity, they also suggest that Moose should start making home videos to pass the time. Caring for Aisha is no easy task since everything needs to be germ-proofed. After all, let's admit that cuteness does have its limits, and babies are a mess. Moose is counting the days, even though she is not ready to give up. She didn't even have too many options, to begin with. But one day, on the phone with Panda, she discovers that he's made lunch plans with a woman named Sonia, who apparently needs help navigating through her divorce. But Moose is suspicious about why she would want help from Panda rather than an actual divorce lawyer. What's more, Panda admits that he's planning on wearing his cool shirt, which really ticks her off, and when he eventually hangs up, she is absolutely furious. As Aisha narrates, there is something about the name Sonia that just naturally raises a lot of eyebrows. Had it been Sheila, Shushma, or even Mamta, Moose probably wouldn't have batted an eyelash. But now, she couldn't help but wonder how he used to be all over her before they got married. The romance was real then. And it seemed like maybe distance was a bit of a deal breaker. The two lovebirds, Panda and Moose, had been so romantic that baby Aisha had been to her first Bollywood movie even before she was born. Instead of the regular hymns, she heard Bollywood songs and famous dialogues as a fetus. And now, Moose had even stopped responding to Panda's calls. She wouldn't settle for a half-hearted apology, that much she knew. So, after 5 days, Panda finally turns up at their doorstep in London and admits that the long distance was really taking a toll on their relationship. Also, he announces that he's been transferred to London for 6 months so that they can all stay together. But Moose drops another bomb on him by informing him that they're not talking months but years, like 10 years or more. Aisha's body is a deadly war zone until she develops fully functional B and T cells, and that's going to take a little more than just a few months. But Moose also emphasizes that it's just 10 years, and if 10 years could save Aisha's life, it wasn't asking too much, was it? So, the family settles in London and continues with their somewhat mundane routine. But at least they're together now. Aisha narrates that while everyone had their fair share of problems, she was the cause of most of these problems when it came to the people around her. Yet, they never wavered in their support, not even for a second. She even jokingly calls herself the villain of the story. Still, things had started getting better for the Shohris. And despite all odds, Panda actually started minting money without robbing a bank. They moved to a quiet suburban area in London to avoid large crowds and the germs that came with them. And unlike most other kids her age, Aisha didn't visit Buckingham Palace, the London Eye, or Big Ben. Rather, she frequented the Great Ormond Street Hospital. She wasn't even allowed to stop and pet a dog because, you guessed it, germs. Even Aisha herself was pretty much done with the whole situation. But her family was not ready to give in. They would fight till the last second. At one of her bi-yearly appointments, to everyone's surprise, the doctors declare that Aisha's condition is finally stable, and that she can go on to have a normal life, at least as normal as one could, given the circumstances. And with that, the family wasted no time in moving back to India, where they could get back to the life of their dreams. It seemed that London had not really grown on them all that much. How could it, though, given their situation? Despite Moose's apprehensions, they moved back, considering they could always return to London if something went wrong. And moving to India wasn't such a bad idea, even for Aisha. She wasn't being homeschooled anymore, and she could actually flaunt the Bollywood skills that she had acquired from hours of binging in the name of learning Hindi. She fit in just fine with the other kids and even developed a crush on one of the senior boys, Karan. But Moose didn't change even after moving back to India. She was still very much obsessed with disinfecting everything for Aisha. And things were going pretty swell for a while, like they say. It was the calm before the storm. And the storm hit them when they least expected it. The Shohuris threw a party at their house, and the walls were literally echoing with laughter. But it's cut short a little too soon when Ishan finds Aisha sprawled unconscious on the floor. Then, all hell breaks loose. Doctors had warned that the chemotherapy might have side effects. They'd repeated numerous times how they couldn't guarantee anything. But did Panda and Moose really have a choice? It was either that or let Aisha die before she even had a chance to stay alive. Moose and Panda did what they could because they could not let their second daughter die in vain. But now, it turned out that chemo did have side effects for Aisha, even if they showed up after a whopping 14 years. She has what they call busulfan lung damage, which leads to pulmonary fibrosis, and the worst part is that the condition is not yet curable, which means that the four of them are back where they started. Aisha was admittedly frustrated. All those years of caution for nothing. Maybe Moose actually should have her while there was still time. After all, she was going to die now anyway. At least that would have been less painful for all of them. Now, she had only 5 more years left, and she had to spend them counting her days. Moose, however, fast-forwarded her feelings of sadness. She wanted to ensure that Aisha made the most of her life. She wanted her to experience everything she could ever want in whatever time she had left. So, she decides that the most important thing now is Aisha's happiness. She starts off by adopting a dog that they named Rollo. This surprises Aisha and Ishan, but Moose brushes it off, saying that Aisha can take anti-allergy pills. But Moose's Operation Aisha doesn't end there. In fact, she gets Ishan to somehow convince Karan to start hanging out with Aisha more often. And if that wasn't ridiculous enough, she goes against store policy to sneakily get Aisha's size in a sweater. She didn't mean any harm, though. She only wanted Aisha to experience everything in life, including love and intimacy, before she ran out of time. Still, Moose pretty much drove Ishan crazy until he left for London to escape the madness. And now, even more than before, Panda and Moose's entire attention is focused on Aisha. They made her exercise to keep her lungs working. Still, Panda would at least sleep at night since he had to go to work. But Moose was hell-bent on spending every waking moment with Aisha. So much so, even Panda started working from home, specifically from Aisha's room. One day when Karan is visiting, he asks about one of Aisha's paintings that depicts Rollo sitting on her bed. But Karan doesn't quite understand that concept until she explains that the idea behind the portrait is that she'll be here forever, even when she's gone. At this, Karan remarks that Aisha could make a great inspirational speaker, and that's just another idea for Moose to execute, so she's on it in a flash. And thus, Aisha gets to give her first speech in front of at least 1,000 people. She jokes that anything she'd say would be a hit because the audience would sympathize with the dying girl. Regardless, the speech was a huge success. However, it turns out that Karan actually only likes Aisha as a friend, which breaks her heart. And since Moose and Panda thought the best way to treat a broken heart would be to go on an impromptu family vacation, that's what they did. They even call Ishan all the way from London. Panda and Moose even try to get Aisha to try parasailing because, at this point, keeping her happy is more important than keeping her alive. Nevertheless, this didn't mean Aisha didn't appreciate her family's efforts. In fact, when they took her underwater, it was one of those moments where you spend your life to the fullest. And in her own words, life didn't give her these moments. Panda and Moose created them. However, the plane ride back isn't so smooth. Aisha struggles to breathe due to the air pressure but survives nonetheless. But it was clear that her condition was deteriorating and that she might need to go for a lung transplant soon. But the couple is divided over this decision. Moose thinks that a lung transplant is risky even for a healthy body, and Aisha wouldn't be able to take it, while Panda insists that they should at least try because it might increase Aisha's lifespan by 10 years. This soon escalates into a heated conversation, wherein Moose even taunts Panda about Tanya and how his insistence on following the doctors led them to lose their daughter. Ultimately, though, they decide to leave this decision to Aisha herself. And as expected, Aisha decides against getting a transplant because she thinks that dying at 28 would be no easier than dying at 18. Still, she dials up Ishan and confesses that she's not really ready to die. But he consoles her, saying that the rest of them will be joining her soon in their next life. This helps soothe her for the time being, but it obviously can't help her condition. As for Moose, there was no stopping her either. She wouldn't even sleep. This obviously makes her very irritable until she finally has a psychotic breakdown. Hence, she's hospitalized at a mental health facility, and Panda is left to deal with the responsibility of Aisha alone. But Aisha promises him that she won't leave, at least until Moose gets back home. And Moose does come back after a week when she's back to her senses. What's more, Aisha is finally done writing her book because she jokes, not everyone can avoid responsibilities, like Moose having a psychotic breakdown. So much so, they've even found a publisher called Bloomsbury for her book. But Aisha's condition is only becoming progressively worse. One day, Aisha wakes up, and her breathing is worse than normal, so Moose gets straight to work. She calls Panda and Ishan to sit beside her. But she also doesn't want Aisha to leave without seeing her book published, which is why she dials up the publisher and requests an early copy. After consistent persistence, he agrees. But the main problem at this point is that they can't get their hands on enough oxygen cylinders, and Aisha is using up more oxygen than usual. But despite everything, she still has her signature smile. And, of course, she can't help but crack jokes even at a time like this. Aisha's book arrives just in time for her to see it. And just like that, she left. She arrived with a bang and left with a bang, but this one was bigger, maybe even worth celebrating. Moose takes Aisha's Tree of Life necklace as a return gift, and Aisha is laid to rest on top of her sister Tanya's grave. Still, Aditi did not speak for 6 months after her passing, and even Nuran refused to talk about it altogether. And when his London office called, he decided to move back immediately. However, Aditi isn't too happy with the idea and decides to stay back. She explains that she doesn't know what to do with Aisha's stuff. Do they take it with them, throw it out, or just leave it here? She doesn't know which option would be right because she's not ready to accept that their daughter is no more. But Nuran is also frustrated. Of course, he misses Aisha, but he still wants to start a new life. And he's actually very disappointed to hear Aditi talk so casually about living separately. Aditi admits that she spent all her life caring for Aisha and that she really doesn't know what to do with her life anymore now that Aisha's gone. Nuran is given a farewell before leaving for London. He reminisces over how the first time he went to London, he didn't even have enough money to go. Also, as part of his speech, he shows a video of Aisha that he found on her laptop. It's a video that she had recorded as a sort of message after her death. Nuran admits that even the thought of Aisha haunts him because he, too, cannot fully accept her death just yet. But he explains that he did go to her room one last time and found the video. She uses the opportunity to say goodbye to everyone and explains that she lived her life to the fullest, so she doesn't have any regrets, and they shouldn't either. She even apologizes for not going for the lung transplant and reminds them of the concept behind her self-portrait. And she ends with how she's now chilling with Tanya Diddy in the pink sky that Ishan painted. This finally gives them the closure they need. Nuran settles in London, and Aditi also joins him after a few months. And that's how the story ends on a happy note. After all, we're all going to die someday. And at least Aisha lived a life fuller than most people ever will. Hence, there's really no room for regrets. The most we can do is spend every moment like it's our last because we never know when that'll actually be true. As for Aisha, she's been perpetuated thanks to social media, and you can even find her on YouTube, including the TED Talk she gave, also known as the inspirational speech. So, if you're still here, ask yourself if you're ready to die. Have you lived enough to die without regrets?